Welcome back, everyone. We are starting week number 7. We are over the hump and heading for the finish line. Over halfway there. This week we're going to examine the third leg of the test examination triangle. As educators, we need to be savvy about these terms in order to discuss them intelligently. It's too easy to badmouth the testing process by claiming that the tests are not reliable, invalid, or biased against certain students. After this week, you'll be able to know if a test is biased against a group of individuals and how test companies go about eliminating that bias. Okay. This is something that I do in my live classes. I conduct a think, pair, share. So I'm not going to do it online. I can't do it online because it takes too long for people to talk to each other. So someone might decide they're going to do all their work on this course from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, where someone else might start today on Wednesday. So to have a think, pair, share would be unfair to all of you. So, but what I like to do is, because I do this in my live classes, I at least want to share this with you because I think it's a very powerful strategy that you, when you become teachers or if you are teachers, should use often. Years ago, there was a lot of important research on wait time, okay, the time between when a teacher asks a question and when she receives a response. In the quote-unquote good old days, which really weren't good old days, teachers often took responses from the first student to raise their hands, and I think that still happens today. It's easy to do because you're feeling the pressure to keep moving, so you ask a whole class question, and boom, there's the first kid. And so those kids that are reactive or think quicker are getting the most response time from the teacher. But we know from learning styles research that I didn't put my phone on. It's my wife. She'll call me back in a little bit. Anyway, we didn't know at the time that there are students that are reactive thinkers and there are those students that are reflective thinkers. So this is a strategy that allows all students to get a chance. Okay, when you're just using whole class questioning, only one student is answering and 25 or 30 others are sitting there listening. Right? With this strategy, everybody gets to think and everybody gets to participate. So it's a very powerful strategy. Lots of times when I do this strategy, you always take a minute, as I say here, with your partner, share your answer. Youngest goes first. Okay, you always try to pick a characteristic that isn't offensive to someone. Like you have to be careful when you're talking about physical characteristics, because young kids and especially teenagers are very sensitive. You know, if you say the person with the reddish hair, or the longest hair, or the shortest hair, that may hurt somebody's feelings. You don't want to do that. Okay. In my classes, when I talk about this, not using characteristics that will embarrass people, I go around and I say, okay, now the ugliest one goes first, and it gets a laugh out of everybody. But that's a non-example. You know, that's like the extreme. Don't use anything like that. We haven't read this chapter yet, and it's not going to be mandatory to read this chapter. I have it in the assignments. It says read chapter 4 on absence of bias, and I think you should, but I'm going to talk about what Popham says in this chapter, so if you choose not to, I don't think you'll miss a lot, but you should at least internalize what I'm going to say in my presentation here. Okay. Now the question I ask here is something I would like you to think about. You know, many of you claimed in the discussion boards, and many, if not all, and you'll read about, you have read about it in Alfie Cohen's Getting Evaluation Wrong, that standardized tests are biased or unfair to special needs students and or ELL students. A lot of people have said that, and the article that Lacey did said that as well. Okay, so well, how do test makers account for that? So, and what do you mean that they're biased or unfair. Okay, if you're saying they're biased just because the kids haven't had the information yet, well, then that's not the test's fault. That's because either the kids haven't gone to school, haven't been exposed to it, or haven't been taught it yet. That's a different story. That doesn't mean the test is biased. That just means the kids haven't been instructed. And many people use that with children of poverty. They claim tests are biased against them, but what they really mean is those kids just haven't been taught this information yet. So keep that in mind. Okay. Let's talk about the definition. And this is the definition of bias, and I'll read it. Well, you can read along with me. The qualities of an assessment instrument that offend or unfairly penalize a group of students because of their gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, or other such group defining characteristics. Okay, so to yourself, respond to this definition, and how does it fit with what you previously believed about what made a test bias? Okay, so remember that there's two parts. Either offends, okay, so a test could be biased because it's offensive, all right, or it could be biased because it unfairly penalizes a group of students. And I think in my math textbook, it talks about a teacher having a lesson where students went out and tried to buy the most economically the food that was that fit a budget. Okay, and one student was of an ethnic group that didn't eat meat, and so he was penalized unfairly because that wasn't the correct solution or the most economic solution. So that would be a case of an assignment that was biased against a group. Okay, all right. Now, as I said in the definition, there's two types of biases. One is offensiveness. So when the content presents negative stereotypes of certain subgroups. So something could be offensive to females, could be offensive to African Americans, could be offensive to Hispanics, or some other subgroup, okay, because they're of the stereotype that's presented. Okay, the other part is what's called unfair penalization, when a student's test performance is distorted because of the group he belongs to. Popham used an example of a test question that asks a student to write about soccer in the United States. So for a non-native born student or a non-athletic student, this could be considered unfair. So that would be unfair penalization. All right, disparate impact is another way to look at the fairness of tests, and this is after a test has been given. This is the only way you can find out if there is disparate impact, right? And that's when, after a test is given, a subgroup performs less well than others. Now, does this mean it's unfair to that group, or that the test is biased? Not necessarily, but it's a warning signal, and it's a flag. So that means we will go back and look at that exam and look at the questions on that exam and say, okay, now we know that these kids, this subgroup of kids, didn't do well on this test, so let's examine it again to see if there's something in there. And you may find there's nothing, but again, that's just a red flag that will let you know that there may be something wrong. So this is a question that Popham asks: if this does happen, well, what could be the reasons? So that's something to think about. All right, so we've talked about the kinds of biases. Okay, there's disparate impact when one group doesn't do well. There's the two types of bias when it's either offensive to a group or it puts one group at a disadvantage. Right? So how do we eliminate bias? Okay, well, there's a couple of ways. Most big testing companies have what they call bias review panels, and you get a panel together of people from all different groups, ethnic groups, socioeconomic groups, and you get them together to do a question by question, after the test is created, do a question by question review of it. And this is an important part. And Popham makes a note of this, that as they're going through, they have to check off if it might be biased. So that's a very different kind of criteria than if it is biased. So if it is biased, you have to make a decision. Well, I'm not sure. I can't say it's biased, right? But if you can say it might be biased, that's a much looser standard, and it eliminates a lot more questions that way. So you can see that this is one way to be sure, to be very sure, that the questions on the test that you've created aren't going to be biased towards a certain group, right? So, but as Popham says, I'm going to pause this for a minute. Okay, I'm back. Got a phone call from my stepdaughter, but anyway, I get no calls during the day, very few calls. So I've gotten 2 calls since I've started this recording. Anyway, I was talking about reviewing the test as a whole, as opposed to item by item. Once that is done, once the item by item is done, then you have to look at the whole test, because as a group, the test itself may be biased against somebody. So it's like being global and analytic. Global sees the whole picture. Analytics go step by step. Well, it's the same way with this eliminating bias. You have to look at the whole test. Oh boy. Okay, so how do you eliminate bias with your tests? Well, I wouldn't recommend getting a group together, a group of your fellow teachers, to meet after school to examine each other's tests. And just like in the reliability testing, test-retest reliability of your own test, it's just a waste of time to do that. But you should, if you have a large subgroup of students in your class, like if you have a lot of Latinos, or you have a lot of kids from poverty and you're not in that group, then a good thing to do would be to show your test to a fellow teacher who may be in that subgroup and say, hey, can you find anything wrong with these questions? I would appreciate your help. And this is helpful when dealing with parents. Now, I don't know how it is where all of you work, but I know there are parents now that are just looking for some way to get their kids out of taking tests, or if they do poorly on a test, taking responsibility for it. And they'll attack you if they know anything about testing and say this test is biased against Puerto Ricans, or this test is biased against Mexicans. So you have to be able to defend that. If you use this technique of looking at your tests, then you'll be able to do that without any trouble. Okay. I am going to end the first half now, and when you come back, I'll start with the homework for next week, and I'll finish up this absence of bias chapter. Okay. See you in a bit.